All right, welcome to week four. This week we are working our way through socialism. I mentioned in the overview that Marxism provided the most influential and perhaps infamous interpretations of socialism. I'll confess that I find the Fabians and the second generation revisionists like Edward Bernstein to be eminently worthy of consideration, but Marx also provides one of the more systematic accounts of socialism, and so I'm going to focus this mini lecture on Marxism. Marx earned his doctorate in philosophy in 1841 and started his career as a liberal journalist, writing columns criticizing the forces of reaction in Europe until the newspaper that he was writing for, the Rheinische Zeitung, got shut down for one of Marx's columns attacking the Russian Tsar's reactionary policies. Marx very quickly migrated from liberal to more radical perspectives and encountered a group called the Young Hegelians, which included people like Max Stirner, Bruno Bauer, David Strauss, and Arnold Ruge. Marx found in left Hegelianism a perfect vehicle for a revolutionary theory. Marx was particularly influenced by Hegel's view of history as the unfolding of the human spirit. Hegel's idea of the cunning of reason, by which he meant human actions often produce unintended but nevertheless rational consequences that contribute to the development of spirit throughout history, was useful to Marx. Related to the cunning of history is the idea of a dialectic, which again refers to the processes by which opposite forces come into conflict with one another, eventually culminating in the overcoming of this conflictual situation in a newer and higher form of human spirit that more accurately expresses human potential. Marx is famous for declaring that he had flipped Hegel on his head. Hegel was a philosophical idealist, which is a school of thought contending that language is innately tied to reality and that we have no means of escaping the confines of language. Marx, in contrast, advanced a dialectical materialist approach to history, arguing that what is most important for understanding human existence is the means of production, the economy by which people provide for human subsistence. For Marx, human history is, in essence, the history of class conflict and of exploitation, as master and slave, lord and serf, and today bourgeoisie and proletariat struggle for control over the means of production. There is an almost prophetic quality to Marx's writing, and Marx clearly believed that because history unfolded in the way it had in the middle of the 19th century, that it would unfold in predictable ways in the future. This is another thing that he kind of, and something that another socialist or European theorist named Saint Simon basically kind of argued. Another important concept that Marx borrowed from Hegel is the idea of alienation, which refers to the separation of classes of people from their human potential. In my chapter 5, first presentation 1, slide 17, I have a slide that basically lays out this master and slave dialectic and the role that alienation plays in both provoking and resolving a confrontation, which for both Hegel and Marx, the end of that confrontation would be a new unfolding of the human spirit that more fully realizes the collective human potential. Marx believed that workers in particular were alienated in 4 key respects. They were alienated from the product of their labor, the activity of production itself. They're alienated from their human potential, which he described as species essence, and they're also alienated from other workers. So Marx was a convinced radical. He believed that capitalism had once been a progressive force in the world, but at its core was oppressive to the working class. Marx also believed that the bourgeoisie was driven by an inescapable logic to continue extracting the maximum amount of profit from workers, and that this exploitation would eventually result in a kind of global revolution. But he didn't think it would be easy. He believed that aside from ruthlessly seeking to extract profits from workers, their primary fear was was of the workers throwing off their shackles, and they erected an elaborate, the bourgeoisie erect an elaborate set of ideas and beliefs, which Marx describes as the social relations of production, that are designed to justify and legitimize capitalism. A key element of this ideological superstructure is religion, which encourages workers to adopt a fatalistic attitude towards their circumstances in this world. Marx describes religion as the opiate of the people because it represents to him a manifestation of false consciousness, which Marx believes, again, is the most serious obstacle to overthrowing capitalism. So how does the alienation of the workers resolve itself? First, capitalism will begin to experience a succession of economic crises brought on by the concentration of wealth. Second, the bourgeoisie must thoroughly immiserate the proletariat, which again means, dissing them, putting them in worse and worse conditions in their hope to extract greater and greater levels of profit. This will cause workers increasingly to realize there can be no compromising with these people. An essential step in this revolutionary sequence is the formation of revolutionary class consciousness. Without this collective awareness of their revolutionary potential, the proletariat are vulnerable to being divided and defeated in detail by the forces of reaction that the bourgeoisie will marshal to resist the workers. This was the lesson that Marx learned from the Paris Commune of 1871. Once revolutionary class consciousness is achieved, the next step is to seize state power and install what Marx described as the dictatorship of the proletariat, which would govern in the interests of the workers and begin the process of scourging from humanity the selfish impulses that for most socialists is the original sin of humanity. Once human beings have learned to live with one another on equal terms, the state would wither away, yielding to what Marx described as communism, where human beings would fully realize their human potential, retaining the productive capacities of capitalism, but without the class divisions. So that's one version of socialism. And one thing you should learn over the course of this week is that there are many different interpretations of socialism, and indeed there are many different interpretations of Marxism. The implication is that not all manifestations of socialism are equivalent. The social democracy practiced in the Scandinavian countries of Northern Europe is vastly different to the socialism practiced in Venezuela. For that matter, is socialism the reason why Venezuela is in such dire straits? I would say corruption is by far the greater problem. So we have a lot of ground to cover this week, and I'm sure some of this will raise a lot of questions, and that's what the forums are for. Ask me questions in the forum, and I will provide answers. I'm going to be participating in all these forums. So I'll close with one more question for you to consider, and we can talk about it again this week. What's the critical distinction between a liberal and a socialist? Let's have a great week.